So when you think of Florence Nightingale, there's a very specific image that almost certainly pops into your head.
Oh, yeah. The lady with the lamp.
Exactly. This gentlewoman gliding through dark hospital wards, comforting wounded soldiers. It's become this symbol of like a secular saint.
It really has. It's sort of the foundational myth of modern nursing. But the thing with myths is they tend to sand down all the sharp edges. And with Nightingale, the sharp edges are actually the most interesting part of her story.
That is exactly what struck me going through the sources for today. I mean, if you strip away all that Victorian sentimentality, you don't find a soft-spoken caregiver. You find a data nerd,
A total data
a
nerd.
relentless administrator, and maybe most surprisingly, you find a radical theologian.
Theologian is definitely the right word. I know it sounds a little strange in a medical context, but we are looking at a woman whose religious views were so specific and, frankly, so controversial for her time that they didn't just influence her work, they dictated it.
We're pulling from a really fascinating mix of sources today. We've got excerpts from a comparative dissertation on her health beliefs, some articles on her scientific spirituality, and even parts of her own privately printed book, Suggestions for Thought.
And the picture that comes out is,
Yeah.
well, it's intense.
It is. So the mission for this deep dive is really to connect those dots. We want to see how Nightingale's very, very unique definition of God, a God of laws, a God of statistics, led directly to the modern idea of sanitation.
Yeah.
And just to tease where this is all going, we are going to explore how she saved thousands of lives, essentially, by being wrong about the science.
Right.
She didn't believe in germ theory as we know it, yet she cleaned up medicine. Why? Because she believed dirt was a sin.
Not just, a health hazard, a literal theological error.
So let's start there with the theology, because to get the nurse, you have to get the believer. And she wasn't exactly your church on Sunday Anglican, was she?
Oh, far from it. In fact, she found the traditional Victorian church incredibly frustrating. She was, for all intents and purposes, a deist.
The clockmaker philosophy, right?
Yeah.
The idea that God is this supreme rational intelligence who designed the universe, wound it up like a clock, and just set it running based on perfect, unchanging laws.
And the key part of that, the really crucial part, is that once that clock is running, the creator doesn't reach down and fiddle with the gears to perform a miracle.
This is such a critical point because it totally changes the whole purpose of prayer. In the traditional view, especially during a cholera outbreak or a war, you go to church and you pray for God to step in.
You ask for a favor, please stop the plague.
Right. But Nightingale looked at that and basically said, that's irrational. If God is perfect, then his laws have to be perfect. So why would he break his own perfect laws just because you asked him to? She actually called that kind of prayer lazy.
Lazy is a pretty harsh word for prayer.
It is, but it makes perfect sense in her framework. She believed that if God set up all the laws of the universe, including the laws of health, then it was our job to figure out what those laws are and, obey them.
There's a brilliant insight in her book, Suggestions for Thought, where she argues that studying statistics is actually a more religious act than reading the Bible.
Wow.
She called scientific laws the thoughts of God.
I love that phrase, the thoughts of God. It completely reframes what she was doing. If you're poring over a mortality table or calculating infection rates, you're not just doing paperwork, you are literally reading God's mind.
It turns the statistician into a kind of high priest.
Yeah.
And it explains her intensity. I mean, if you believe that sanitation is a form of worship, then a dirty drain isn't just gross.
It's blasphemy.
Right.
There's that devastating quote of hers. To think that we can be good under any circumstances is like thinking that we may be healthy when we are living over a sewer.
She just refused to separate the
Yep.
spiritual from the physical.
Yeah.
You can't be a good spiritual person if you are physically wallowing in filth,
Yeah.
because you're breaking the laws of nature that God set up.
So this brings us to a really interesting point about how she saw the human body and disease. If God is this perfect clockmaker and the universe is built on perfect order, why do people get sick? Why does the machine break?
Well, in her view, the machine isn't really breaking. Or, to put it another way, the sickness isn't the break. The sickness is the repair.
Okay, unpack that a little.
She believed in this idea of universal perfection, that every human has divine nature, and we're all sort of evolving toward being one with God.
So disease is a reparative process.
That's the exact term she used, yeah. If you breathe in bad air or you drink tainted water, you have broken a natural law. Your body then reacts, you get a fever, you start coughing. That isn't an attack. That is your body trying to purge the poison and restore the balance.
So the symptom is the body's attempt to get back to following the rules.
Precisely. And this is where we run headfirst into the biggest conflict in her story, the germ theory debate. Because today we know diseases are caused by specific pathogens, bacteria, viruses.
Right. Tiny little agents that invade the body. But Nightingale was a staunch anti-contagionist.
She was, and it's the part of her story that usually trips people up. You know, how could the founder of modern nursing not believe in germs? But when you look at the sources, her rejection wasn't just like stubbornness, it was theological.
It all comes back to the clockmaker god.
It does. Think about how early germ theory or contagionism must have sounded to a Victorian. The idea was that you could be a perfectly healthy, moral person living in a clean house, and then bam, you sit next to the wrong person on a bus, catch some invisible bug, and die.
It feels completely arbitrary. It's just bad luck. Or worse, it feels like a curse.
And Nightingale's God doesn't do luck. To her, the idea of contagion felt like going back to medieval superstition. She much preferred the miasma theory.
Which is the idea that disease comes from filth, from rotting stuff, and from bad air.
Yes, because if disease comes from filth, then disease is a consequence of human negligence. It gives us agency.
That's the key, isn't it? Agency. If the cholera is coming from that pile of rotting garbage in the street, I can do something about it. I can move the garbage. I can solve the problem.
It placed the responsibility squarely back on humans to fix their own environment. So she rejected germs because it felt like a random lottery, and she embraced filth because it felt like a moral imperative.
And the incredible irony is that by waging a holy war on filth to satisfy her theology, she ended up killing the germs anyway.
She was right for all the wrong reasons.
Functionally right, theoretically wrong. And that functional rightness was about to be tested in the most hellish environment you can imagine, the Crimean War.
Yeah, we have to set the scene here because the sources paint a picture that is honestly just hard to stomach. We're talking about the Barrack Hospital in Scutari, 1854.
It wasn't really a hospital, it was more like a warehouse for dying men. So Nightingale arrives, and she doesn't find a medical facility, she finds a theological disaster.
A complete failure to obey God's laws.
The details in the reports are horrific. You've got 4 miles of beds, and I'm using the word beds very loosely here. It's mostly wooden pallets or just the bare floor. The men are still in the uniforms they wore on the battlefield, just stiff with blood and mud.
And the smell. The whole hospital was built on top of a defective sewer system. The cesspools were literally overflowing under the floorboards, and the fumes were just rising up into the wards.
I was just floored by the logistical failure of it all. There's this one stat that blew my mind. For 2,300 men, they had 13 cooking pots.
13. For over 2,000 men, it's unbelievable.
How do you even feed an army on that? You don't. And the hygiene, the sources talk about these things called slipper baths.
Which were basically these little metal tubs.
Yeah.
But they had so few of them that statistically, a soldier in that hospital was only washed once every 80 days.
It's every 80 days. Imagine that. You've got dysentery, maybe gangrene, you're covered in lice, and you get a bath once a season. It was just a factory for death.
So Nightingale rolls up her sleeves. And she doesn't just start holding hands and whispering comforts. She starts what one of the sources calls environmental manipulation.
She basically becomes the quartermaster of Scutari. She buys thousands of scrub brushes, she organizes the laundry, she gets the drains unclogged, she forces the windows open, she wages a holy war on dirt.
And because she's a passionate statistician, she's tracking every single data point while she does this. She had to. I mean, we have to remember, she was fighting the military bureaucracy. The generals back in London, they just thought these men were dying because of the war.
Right, it's a war. People die. That was the attitude.
Exactly. So Nightingale had to prove, mathematically, that the British Army was killing its own soldiers just by putting them in this building.
And the numbers she came up with are just staggering. The sources say that when she arrived, the mortality rate at Scutari was 42.75%.
Nearly half. Almost a coin flip, whether you survived entering that hospital.
And 6 months after her sanitary reforms, the cleaning, the fresh water, the ventilation, that rate dropped to 2.1%.
From over 42% to 2%. That's thousands of lives. And for her, that wasn't a miracle. It was just the expected result of finally obeying God's laws.
But she knew that just sending a spreadsheet to Parliament wasn't going to work.
No, politicians don't read tables.
So she visualized it.
The famous rose diagram, or as she called it, the coxcomb.
It's such a brilliant piece of data communication. For anyone who hasn't seen it, picture a pie chart, but the wedges extend outwards from the center depending on how big the number is.
And she used colors to tell the story. The big blue wedges represented preventable diseases sickness caused by the hospital conditions. The little red wedges were wounds from the battlefield.
And when you look at it, the blue wedges just swallow the red ones. It's not even close.
It's undeniable. You look at that chart for 2 seconds and you see it. We aren't losing the war to the Russians, we are losing it to bad plumbing. She basically shamed the government into action with a picture.
So she comes back from the Crimea, a national hero. But she doesn't retire. She writes notes on nursing. And reading through it, it strikes me that this wasn't really a textbook for nurses in the modern sense. It was more like a manifesto for anyone managing a living space.
It was. And she lays out what she calls the 13 canons of health. You can almost think of them as the 10 commandments of hygiene.
And commandment number 1, above everything else, was ventilation.
She was obsessed with fresh air, completely obsessed. She believed the air inside a house had to be as pure as the air outside. She wrote, "A dark house is an unhealthy house." She wanted windows open all the time, even in winter.
Which brings up the second canon, light.
Direct sunlight. She had observed, again, this is just pure data collection on her part, that patients who were lying in dark corners stayed sick longer. She noticed that sunlight seemed to prevent things like rickets and scrofula.
And again, she's right. She doesn't know about vitamin D. She doesn't know that UV radiation kills bacteria, but she sees the correlation.
Observation was her superpower. But what I find really progressive in Notes on Nursing is that she wasn't just a clean freak. She was incredibly attuned to what we would now call the psychosocial environment, the patient's mental health.
Yeah, the mind-body connection. She got that you can't treat a body if the spirit is crushed.
She talked about this concept of variety. She argued that if you stare at the same 4 blank walls for weeks, the boredom causes an actual physical depression, which makes it harder to recover. She wanted patients to have flowers, pets, beautiful objects to look at, something to change their focus.
I think my favorite example of this is the Inkerman Cafe. It's a detail that gets left out of the history books, but it's so important.
Oh, it's a great story. So in the Crimea, when the soldiers weren't fighting, they were just bored, traumatized, and lonely. And the only places for them to unwind were these canteens that were basically just gin shacks.
So the military command sees drunken soldiers and just wants to punish them.
But Nightingale sees bored humans and wants to treat them. So she sets up a coffee house, the Inkerman Cafe. It had books, maps, newspapers, games.
And she also set up a way for them to send money home, didn't she?
That was huge. Before that, the soldiers just drank their pay because they couldn't physically get the gold back to their families in London. Nightingale set up a remittance system. She restored their role as providers. She gave them back their dignity.
It's that holistic approach again. You clean the drain to save the body, but you build the cafe to save the man.
Exactly. But I do want to circle back to the cleaning for just a second, because there's this intensity to her views on washing that really highlights the theology again.
You're thinking of that slow poison quote.
Yes. She wrote that if a nurse leaves a patient unwashed, with their pores clogged with sweat, she's interfering injuriously with the natural processes of health just as effectually as if she were to give the patient a dose of slow poison.
That is heavy. Leaving someone dirty is morally the same as poisoning them.
And we have to see this in the context of the 1850s. The sources mentioned that among the working class, there was a genuine cultural fear of water.
A fear of water, like they thought it would hurt them.
They did. There were laborers who would brag about never washing below the neck. They thought hot water opened your pores and let the disease in. So Nightingale had to fight this huge cultural battle just to convince people that washing was safe.
Because for her, washing away that noxious matter wasn't just about looking nice. It was about removing the blockage. It was about letting God's reparative process do its work.
You clear the pores, you let the system run as designed, you get out of God's way.
So bringing this all together, we've got this woman who's a theologian, a statistician, a nurse, a reformer. How does this legacy land today? I mean, we live in a world of antibiotics and MRI machines. Do we still need Nightingale's theology of works?
I think we need it more than ever. If you look at the definition of modern nursing, it's distinct from medicine. Medicine treats the disease, nursing treats the patient. That comes straight from her.
She professionalized it, made it a secular, scientific calling.
Right. Before her, nursing was often done by nuns, who were wonderful but focused on the soul, or, on the other hand, by women of ill repute, who had no other options. Nightingale said, no, you need to be moral, yes, but you also have to be educated. You need to use your brain.
thinking nurses.
Exactly.
Right.
She famously said she wanted thinking nurses, not just order takers. She wanted them to observe, to track data, to notice if the ventilation in a room was bad or if a patient wasn't eating.
And that ties right back to her data visualization. I mean, every time we see a chart in a medical journal or look at public health stats, that's Nightingale's legacy. She proved you can save lives with a graph.
Evidence-based medicine. She was one of the grandmothers of that entire field.
It's just incredible to think that all of it stemmed from this very unique spiritual belief. She wasn't trying to be a scientist for science's sake. She was trying to understand the mind of God.
And that's really the main takeaway. She revolutionized healthcare, not because she was soft and caring, though she did care deeply. She did because she was so intellectually rigorous. She believed sanitation was a spiritual requirement. You just couldn't be a good person in a dirty room.
It really challenges the way we look at modern healthcare environments.
It does. And it leaves me with this one thought. Nightingale believed our divine purpose was humanity creating humanity, helping each other evolve toward perfection.
That's a beautiful phrase. Humanity creating humanity.
It is. And it makes me wonder, in our high-tech hospitals with artificial lights and hermetically sealed windows, have we forgotten the basics? Have we forgotten that our environment is the foundation of our well-being?
If Nightingale walked into a modern ICU, what would she say?
I think she'd be impressed by the technology, for sure. But I think she might be horrified that the patient can't see the sky. She might ask why the windows don't open. She'd ask if we are actually treating the reparative process or just the symptoms.
That is something to chew on. Maybe the next time you open a window to let some fresh air in, just remember, you're not just airing out the room. You're practicing a little bit of Nightingale's theology.
You're obeying the laws of health.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of Florence Nightingale. We hope you view the lady with the lamp a little differently now.
Keep asking questions.
And we'll see you next time.